Your first visit, Mr. Harrison. I'll tell you why. Because Noel has been here 3 times.
Oh, yes, he has. That's
Yes, he
right.
has.
Yes. No, no, not my first visit. I've been here, I would think, 4 or 5 times.
To the city.
Yes, just for holidays. I've never
Mhm.
been here working, but I've just been here because I love it.
Mm-hmm. But, I mean, Noel has been in the studio 2 or 3
Oh,
times.
he's been here too, has he?
Yes, every time he's in town, he comes in and we talk about heaven only knows what. He's
Good.
doing very well,
He's doing
too.
awfully well. Yes, he
Yes.
is.
He's
He
a
is.
charming fella.
Yes,
he
he
really
is.
is.
Yes. You meet all the kids? No, you didn't meet all his kids.
No, just Noel. When
No.
the last time he was appearing here at the Hungry Eye.
Yes, when was that?
6 months, perhaps? No, more than 6
More than
months
that,
ago.
I think, yes.
It was more than 6
It's
months.
when I was doing Dolittle, I think, in Hollywood he went up. I think so, yes.
How long did it take to film Dr. Dolittle?
A year.
A year.
Pretty well. From the time we started preparing the numbers, rehearsing the numbers, until we finished finally looping them was a little over a year. I started in April and finished the following May.
Mm-hmm. You're kind of hung up on the Dolittle name. You had Eliza Dolittle in.
Except there's only one O in this one. They're spelt differently.
Oh, that's right.
There's a double O in Shaw's and the one O in this.
I guess you realize that as an offshoot of the My Fair Lady, that probably 50 million men went out and bought one of those little checkered hats.
I wish I'd had some of the profits on the hats.
I wish you should have been tied in with those.
I never was. Gosh.
What about the movie Dr. Dolittle? I would think it would be a fun movie to do.
Well, it looks. I think it looks like a fun movie when you see it. But as a matter of fact, it was a very tough movie to do. I think it was one of the toughest movies I've ever tried to make because we were moving around the world an awful lot. We went to England, and then we came back. Then we were rained out in England. Then we came back to California. We rebuilt the doctor's house on the Fox Ranch, and then moved out to the Caribbean with all the animals to an island called St. Lucia, where we were in the rainy season. So we had about 5 or 6 tropical storms a day. And then came back and then continued filming in Carmel and San Diego. An awful lot of moving. It was very tiring. And also the fact that you were working a lot of the time with not just my little group of animals, which was the chimp and the dog and the parrot, but at occasions I had to do a number, for instance, in a room with about 300, 400 animals.
Good.
A lot of them were loose, and it was a small room, the doctor's sort of study, sort of library place, and with the lights, and with the camera crew, and with everything, and 400 animals.
You don't housebreak 400
well,
animals.
Of course you can't. They've got to be taken out every now and then and led around, and it takes about 3 hours to get them back.
I think it was W.C. Fields who swore that he would never do a movie with an animal or a child. He said.
Oh, well. Well, the only one that really was a terrific stealer of scenes was the little chimp, who was absolutely marvelous. Nobody minded him doing that because he was such a lot of fun,
It must have been a monumental job getting the animals to do the very things that they do in the picture.
Well, it was, because what we had to do was waste a lot of stock. We just turned the cameras over, and then I never rehearsed with them. We just did it impromptu, more or less. Just hoped for things to turn up, and they would do the most remarkable things, not having known they'd done them. Accidentally, as we had to wait for the accident. It was really extraordinary.
Films are hard work, aren't they? Really.
Oh yes, but I think with animals is the hardest work, really. I've done another film since then in Paris, which really was a breeze. I did it with my wife Rachel, and it was a French farce by Feder called Flea in Her Ear, which the National Theatre in England had done. And they played in Canada too, as a matter of fact. And so this was kind of so easy after Dolittle.
But I think the average person, myself, for example, we look upon motion picture work as being such a simple thing. You probably at 10 o'clock you stroll on the stage and do a few lines, and then you take the rest of the day off. It doesn't really work
that way, does it? No, gosh.
Have you done much television work?
No, not a lot. I did this in the early days, quite a lot of television from when it was based in New York. And but recently I haven't done anything much on television. I think the last thing I did was when I finished in Fair Lady at the Mark Hellinger, and I did a big special called Crescendo with a lot of marvelous colored performers. But that was the beginning of specials. This was 58, I should think. And I haven't really done anything much since then.
If you had your druthers, if you had your choice, would you do, I guess you'd keep your hand in everything, but do you prefer one particular line, one particular thing, the stage or motion pictures or television? Is there one thing that to
No,
you is more rewarding or something that you prefer to do?
I think you have to really go where the material happens to be. And in recent years, I've been very lucky with getting some very interesting pictures offered to me. And I haven't been back in the theatre since, about 7 or 8 years. Now, this year, I would like to find something to do in the theatre. I'm searching for a play,
Hmm.
which I'd like to do on Broadway and possibly in London. At the moment, I haven't any film scripts that I'm absolutely mad about.
Hmm.
So I think it looks as though I might go back to the theatre just for a little while.
Do you ever think about motion pictures that you do being around for years and years to come? I talked to Shirley Temple Black one day, and she said that her youngsters sit and watch Shirley Temple movies, and that it's like having a living picture book of their mother when she was a child. And she said, to me, she said the most interesting thing about film work is to think that these pictures will be in existence, well, forever, really. And she said that to me is the most rewarding thing because they become a permanent thing.
Well, in the case of Shirley Temple, of course, they did. I think some films you want to stay around, but some you want to lose. So, I mean, that you don't want them all there all the time. I'm proud of a few of them to be around, and I would hope that Dolittle would be around for quite a while as a sort of annual affair,
Hmm.
because I think it is rather good in its way.
What about Anthony Newley? Did you know him prior to the movie?
I did, but not very well. I knew him in London because I loved him in Stop the World,
Hmm.
and we then discussed about the possibility of doing a show together, which developed into being The Roar of the Grease Paint, which he
Hmm.
did, which I wasn't in. But he did come and he and Leslie Bricusse came and played the music for me of that. So I'd met them that much only, really. When I started to work with Leslie, almost a year before we started shooting this picture, mostly on my musical material.
Hmm.
And I didn't see a lot of Tony then, because Tony was elsewhere working, I think. And then we made the film together. I think he's enormously talented.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, because it seems that everyone who works with him just cannot say enough about
Oh
the
no.
things that Anthony Newley does.
Oh, it's marvelous. I think he's absolutely unique. He's got a marvelous voice, and what he did with this. You haven't seen the film, have
No,
you?
not yet.
I think what he did with this was marvelous, was because he played the part so legitimately. He was with me. He was kind of my sidekick all through the picture.
Mhm.
He was my little Irish chum, who comes on all the
Mr.
voyages
Muggs.
with me. Yes, and he played the scenes so nicely with me, and I enjoyed working with him very much.
Mhm. Is he easy to work with? Is he
Oh
an easy
yes,
person to work
oh
with?
yes. He keeps slightly. He keeps himself slightly away from things. I think he's got a lot of other things in his mind. So do I. As a matter of fact, when I'm working, we meet on the set,
Hmm.
but he would go off to his caravan, I go off to mine, and we have other things to obviously think about. But on the whole, I actually on the active when you were out there doing it, I love being with him.
Hmm. But in years in motion pictures, you must have at one time or another worked with somebody that was very, very difficult to work with. That must happen on occasion. I mean,
Well, I don't think. I mean, I think that it's really up to the individual whether it becomes a difficulty or not. I haven't found it so, because I think on the screen, it's you're much more likely to have crosses of opinion with the director than you are with your fellow
mhm.
actors.
Do you know, I don't think many people, myself included, really understand what a director does. What is the function of a director in the filming of a motion picture? We know what the actors do, and the
Well,
writers certainly.
well, he should guide the whole thing. It should be his total overall conception of the picture from beginning to end,
Hmm.
and therefore he should help to guide the actors into giving performances which he thinks should fit into his overall picture of the whole.
Hmm.
This is basically the job. Doesn't always work. I think that most directors are these days highly technical, and they're more interested, a great number of them are more interested in the technicalities of filmmaking than the actors.
Hmm.
And some of them leave the actors more or less to their own devices.
Well, wouldn't that be a welcome thing? I would think.
Well,
in
I
many
think it is. I mean, I think the happiest relationship between the director and the leading actors is if there's a complete rapport. You see, he's really the only person that you're doing it for.
Mm-hmm.
And he has to be your, at the best, has to be your friend, and because he's the person that you really basically have to rely on,
Mm-hmm.
because it's all very well, but you may know exactly what you're going to do with the part, but you have to have somebody behind the camera to say okay or not okay,
Mm-hmm.
and to guide you if you get into wrong patterns of or a scene isn't working. It's entirely up to the director to see that it does work.
Do you play to the director? Is
Well,
that it?
you indirectly you do, yes. I mean, if you haven't got a sort of rapport with the man behind the camera, it becomes increasingly difficult to screen act.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's very interesting.
Because you cannot, in fact, rely on your own opinion of how a scene has gone, because you haven't seen it.
Mm-hmm.
When you're acting, it's a little bit as though you had blinkers on. You're very concentrated, but you're not outside it.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to have some sympathetic person outside the scene
with an objectivity
with an
that you don't have.
which I couldn't have. That's absolutely essential to the actor, and it's very important, I think, for the actor to get on with the director.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if I haven't, like with Richard Fleischer, we worked this year together. Now we're the greatest of friends, and I'm very, very fond of Richard, and we got very close during the making. I hadn't made a film with him before. Mostly, I've known the people at Q-Corps that made Fair Lady. I hadn't actually worked with, but I'd known him very, very well for a great number of years. Coming to Hollywood, I used to go to his house and we used to chat about things. So that wasn't a stranger like Fleischer was. And the one before that I made with Mankiewicz, The Honeypot, I'd worked with Joe on Cleopatra, and I worked with him on two very early pictures I made in California, The Ghost and Mrs. Muir and Escape, which is in the 40s. So I knew him pretty well. I'd rather work with directors that I know as men, you know, before I start to work. It's easier, I think.
Is there much difference between making pictures in the United States and making them in England?
No, I don't feel so. I don't think so.
In fact, today I imagine it's the same people, really.
It's the same people. And if you make a film like I made in Paris, it's all Charlie Lang was photographing it. We have American cutter Walter Thompson. It's when once you're in the studios, if you're making films for American companies, it's very much like being in Hollywood. I made 3 films in Rome, for instance, at Cinecittà, and it's exactly the same as being at a home studio, really, major studios.
Well, I can understand an actor playing most any kind of a part, throwing himself into most any kind of a part, but the one thing I've never been able to understand is how you can, if you can, dispassionately play a torrid love scene with a beautiful actress. Does that ever become business?
Well, I think it always becomes business.
Really?
Yes. Yes.
I don't think I could get away with
it. Well, you know, it's a very funny thing, but very often the most successful love scenes are between two people who have nothing in common at all. They do it purely mechanically, and maybe have a drink afterwards, or say goodbye, or see you tomorrow, or something. And the people who are in love themselves, sometimes the love scenes on the screen just aren't as exciting as when they're done technically.
Is that right?
I found that.
It would be very difficult for me. For example, with Raquel Welch, if I were starring opposite her.
Well, I mean, there are exceptions.
Oh my! What about the youngsters coming up today, the new actors? Are there any that have particularly interested you in their approach and their?
Well, I tell you, I love that boy who plays in The Graduate. Have you seen The Graduate?
No, not yet, but I've heard glowing reports.
Awfully good. He's a young stage actor from New York, and I think he's delightful in it. Marvelous.
Isn't this his first picture? I believe it is.
Yes, but he's done a lot of things off Broadway. And I think Mike found him and tested it. Mike Nichols. He really is. He's excellent, I think, of all the very, very new ones.
Well, do you feel as I do that so many of these young actors all look as though they had taken lessons from the same people? They all seem to be doing, I don't know whether it's method acting or what, but they all seem to be doing basically the same kind of thing or trying to, so many of them.
Well, I think the method school has rather died down, hasn't it now?
I don't know.
I don't know. I think so. In New York, I don't know whether there's even the school, I think, has moved to Europe.
Hmm.
I don't think the younger generation are so method conscious as the generation of Brander and that group.
Hmm.
I don't know the very young ones. I don't know that I've seen any of the very young ones except for Hoffman. Oh, well, yes, I have, because I've seen In Cold Blood.
Hmm.
And these were two completely young boys I hadn't seen before.
They had never done anything, I don't believe,
No,
the two
no.
that they used.
But they had to be stylized, didn't they?
Oh, yes, very definitely. I think that was required.
Yes. So they could be, I suppose, considered to be slightly groupie.
Hmm.
Because it was like a documentary, wasn't it?
Yes, very definitely. Some months ago, I got very excited and involved here. Lana Turner came in and sat right where you're sitting. I promised no one would ever sit in the chair again, but I've since relented. She told me that her biggest problem today is in finding scripts. She said that the scripts submitted to her are by and large, well, she called them sick. She said that they are by and large, anguished parts, and she felt that the most difficult thing today was that people were not writing the kind of motion pictures that she felt ought to be done.
Well, they're not. I think that is the trend for the moment. That's why, of course, Dolittle is absolutely against the stream, because the trend that is the trend for bestiality, I think, at the moment, and brutality, and the success of Bonnie and Clyde is a very good example of it being enormous fun to stand up and go brrr, right around a room. I mean, it's. I don't know whether it's good. I would have said it wasn't very good for the teenage population to go and see films of that nature.
I doubt that it's good for impressionable minds, certainly.
It all seems so delicious to kill.
Yes. Do you think it's good for the industry? For the motion picture industry?
I think it's only a flash in the pan, I don't think it's a trend which is going to go on. Just that this year happens to be the most successful pictures this year seem to me to be along that line, except for Dolittle, which is doing marvelously.
Dolittle has already opened in other places.
Oh, yes, yes. It opened in London before the Queen and for a cancer research charity, and then it went to Paris, and then we opened in New York, and then L.A. And now I think we're opening the 24th of January here in San Francisco.
I told you before we went on the air that I had talked to Bob Hope earlier today, and he mentioned that he played before the King and Queen of Thailand. The King of Thailand is a saxophone player.
I didn't know that.
And Les Brown, the band leader, said to the King when he met him, he said, "You're going to wet your reed now?" But I asked Bob Hope, what do you say to the Queen? What in the world do you say to the Queen? And he said that he sat next to her at dinner on 4 different occasions, but he never told me what you say to the Queen. You've certainly met the Queen. I mean, in England, not in Thailand.
Yes, I have.
What do you say? I was just thinking about that. What do you say to a queen?
Well, you don't say anything. You wait. In the case of the Queen of England, you wait for her to talk to you. I mean, you aren't. It isn't etiquette to start a conversation.
I see.
You simply have to wait there until she says something. And she's generally ready with something to say.
Do you recall the first time you met the Queen?
I think it may have been at one of the Royal Command film performances in London, probably quite early on in the late 40s, 50s. And then I met her on the stage. She came on the stage at Drury Lane, the Fair Lady opening after the opening, which is a rather rare thing for her to do. She received us. We generally have to go to her box. She received us on the stage.
And what did she say?
Well, it's usually along the same pattern. She, for instance, at the opening at the Odeon, and the Dolittle opening, she did rather a strange thing, which is not usual. I was introduced again before the film, and she said, "How long has it taken to make?" And I told her where we'd been to make it, things like that. Because she knew we'd been in England, but then I told her about the Caribbean. And then at the end of the film, she did a very unusual thing, because she doesn't usually stop, but I was just at the end of the row where she was, and she really had enjoyed it very much, and she stopped, and she looked radiantly happy, and she thanked me and said that we thought we'd have a great success, which is very rare. She doesn't commit herself to things like that.
That's almost a commercial pronouncement.
Well, it's actually a plug, yes.
I have the feeling that I would like Prince Philip, or that anyone would. I have the feeling.
I think he's a marvelous chap. He's very relaxed, and he's very amusing. And he's very intelligent. He makes very good speeches on a great number of subjects, I think. Has he been here?
Yes, he was here about a year and a half ago, and he stayed right across the street, I believe, at the Pacific Union Club.
Oh, yes, probably.
While
yes.
he was here.
Oh, I think he's very bright.
Oh, indeed.
Yes, I like him very much.
You know, we've wandered far afield. We were talking about Dr. Dolittle, and we've talked about just about everything else. Dr. Dolittle opens in San Francisco on Wednesday, January the 24th, and today is the 16th, so that's a week from tomorrow.
Yes.
Will you still be here when the film opens?
Unfortunately, I won't.
No.
I got to go back to L.A. tonight,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm going back to New York for a few days, and then I'm going back to London.
Mm-hmm. Your home is primarily in Europe.
Yes.
Portofino.
Portofino. Well, I'm good. I'm going to London just for a few days, and then I'm going to have a rest in the villa for spring.
Mm-hmm.
Lovely there in the early spring.
Oh, I'll bet it is.
Mm.
The 24th of January, Wednesday, at the United Artists Theater, Dr. Dolittle. And Mr. Rex Harrison, I thank you very, very much for coming in.
It's
been delightful.
Thank you very much indeed. Matthew, think what it would mean if I could talk to the animals. Just imagine it, chatting to a chimp in chimpanzee. Imagine talking to a tiger, chatting to a cheetah. Oh, what a neat achievement that